How is the judicial system funded? Well, there's the first tithe, the first fruits, the firstborn, and the head tax. Those are the ways we fund the judicial system. There are 3 tithes. This is what Josephus says, and he nailed it right on the head, and we've been doing this for thousands of years. Besides those 2 tithes, which I have already said you are to pay every year, the one for the Levite, the other for the festivals, you are to bring every 3rd year a 3rd tithe to be distributed to those that want. Those are the 3 tithes. Tithes is the word maser, which means a 10th part. It's God's financial plan. The first tithe pays for government services. Churches manipulate this a lot today. Yeah. They really do. This was very freeing for me to realize I didn't have to pay this to a religious institute. Right. It really was. Second tithe pays for vacation time, which is what the festivals are. It's our vacation time. And the 3rd tithe pays for welfare, but I like to call it workfare because God doesn't really believe in welfare. He doesn't give free handouts. It's workfare. There are 8 statutes to the first tithe. Tithes are to be given to the Levites. So we already know this. Tithes go to the Levites. A 10th part of all produce is given. A 10th part of all animals is given. Only the priest shall eat the tithes. So this only goes to the government. If a man wishes to redeem part of his tithe, he shall add a 5th part to it. So if you can't afford it, and you need to take from your tithe, you can do it. But you owe 20% back. In fact, if you eat of the tithe accidentally, you owe 20% back. So either way, if it's an accident or you need to purposely borrow, you owe 20% back. You're to pass your animals under the rod to determine the tithe. The 10th one is the tithe. And finally, the Levites are to give a 10th of their tithe to the Aaronic priests. Did you know we do that today? Did you know America still does this? Our state courts give 10% to the federal courts today. Isn't that ironic? It's just ironic. Yeah. It just blows me away that we still follow this. We give 10% from our state courts to our higher courts. So tithing. This is going to be a little different understanding, so please bear with me. Tithes. According to Black's Law Dictionary, the 10th part of the increase, yearly arising and renewing from the profits of lands, the stock upon lands, and the personal industry of the inhabitants. I always find it ironic how these religious words get into our law books. Why is this in Black's Law Book? It's not a religious term, but I want to focus on that personal industry of the inhabitants. Industry, it's the economic activity concerned with the processing of raw materials and manufacture of goods in factories. So according to our law books, tithing wasn't just on the increase of your crops and your animals. It was what you produced from them. This is a property tax. It goes above and beyond what all the letter of the law and the details that he gave to the Levites. Okay, they were an agricultural society. But how does that apply today? Were only the farmers supposed to fund the government and everyone else is off the hook? Is that how it worked? I don't think it is. Let's see where this goes. It's a property tax. Remember, heaven and earth and all that therein is belongs to the Lord. So God charges a tax for what belongs to Him. It's a tax on property. It can only be paid on the increase of property. You don't have to pay it on what you have. It's what they produce. What comes from them? Well, a lot of things can come from them. You can get, wool from sheep and from animals and stuff like that. So there's a lot of ways you can increase your property. This could be crops. It could be animals. Or it could be property. And that's exactly what Abraham did. Now, that really wasn't the specific Levite tithe he did, and I know that. But he tithed to Melchizedek. And he tithed of the property from war. The Messiah even said, look at the spirit of the law here. He said, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin. But then he said, these things you ought to have done. Because it's a property tax. When he gave the parable of the Pharisees, The Pharisee, granted, he was kind of bragging, but he said, I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. It's a property tax. Now, it doesn't directly say that, but it's a property tax.
Priests are not supposed to have property.
When he's saying property, he's talking about goods.
Property is not even a commodity. It's not something you have. It's a right. If you look it up in the law books, it's a right. And we're really going to cover that in about 3 lessons when we get to the 8th commandment. But when I say property, I wasn't really meaning land. I know that's the way we use that term today. Because I always say, I've got property out in Awanga. Okay, yeah, I do. But it's really not what the law books would call property. It's land. So it goes to the Levites. If you look in our colonial America, we tithed. Look at this. The Virginia 1705 Act says, every master or mistress of a family, or in his or her absence, or the non-resident of the plantation, his or her attorney or overseer, shall on the said 10th day of June, by a list under his or her hand, deliver or cause to be delivered to the justice appointed, so the judicial system took this, to take the same, the names and number of all tithable persons abiding in or belonging to his or her family. In fact, I should have put it, but George Washington, when he became president, he wrote a letter kind of mourning the fact that Virginia got rid of their tithing laws. Interesting, our first king, it does exactly what God warned would happen in 1 Samuel. You'll get taxed now, you're not going to be tithed. And what happened when George Washington actually kind of hammered Virginia for doing it, but it's just what naturally happens. With the colonial courts acting as an arm of the church, this is where we're off in America. In some instances, both the courts and the church handed out punishment. The church is a judicial system, you guys. We've redefined it in a religious manner today. Look what the Encyclopedia Britannica says of the word ecclesia, which is the word church. It says, ecclesia became coterminous with the body of male citizens 18 years of age or over, and had final control over policy, including the right to hear appeals in the haleo. That's the public court. Take part in the election of archons or chief magistrates, and confer special privileges on individuals. The church in the wilderness was the tabernacle, which was the judicial system of a nation. Try and read the New Testament, and every time you see the word church, change it to judicial system and see how that tweaks the scripture a little bit. Now, it doesn't change it much, because our church in America used to run the government. That's the power we're supposed to have. And then we did what? We separated church from state. There is our problem. We should have never done that. That was a big problem. And it's been nothing but problems ever since. But just like in the Old Testament, it was a slow, gradual progression of problems throughout Israel's history. That's exactly what's happened to America. A slow, gradual progression of these problems.
So the bottom line is the church should be running it.
The church should be running America today like it used to before our Constitution. When our Constitution came out, for decades it was going pretty good. We had good kings, good presidents. But that doesn't last forever, just like it didn't last with Israel. The early ones were good, and then it got few and far between, and they got really bad, and then every now and then you'd get a good one, and then you get a bad one. That's exactly what's happening to America today. And that is our problem. And we look at church as a religious thing today. And please understand this. I mean, we all go to churches. There's nothing wrong with what we do here at Rock Valley. I love Rock Valley. It's one of the best churches I've been a part of. But the reality is we've given away, and it's not, we should be doing this. We should get together as like-minded people and choose to be obedient to God anyways, despite the fact that our church is not running our government. So when I say that, I'm kind of redefining church, but I'm not knocking what we do, because what other choice do we have? Right? It's the best choice we've got, and that's what we should do.
When he says, do not forsake the gathering of yourselves together.
Exactly. And we shouldn't do that, despite the fact that our church really doesn't have a whole lot of power in America.
We sold it away.
Yeah, we did. Income tax is the opposite of the first tithe. Income tax is a tax on profit and gain. This is what our courts have said about this. Here we have the essential matter, not a gain accruing to capital, not a growth or increment of value in the investment, but a gain, a profit, something exchangeable that proceeding from property. This is not a property tax. This is a tax on profit and gain that comes from property. That's different than property. This arises from corporate activities. See, this is what I keep saying. We need to listen to our judges. They're telling us how the law works in America. Look what Doyle versus Mitchell says. Whatever difficulty there may be about a precise and scientific definition of income. What does income mean? The Bible talks about increase. We talk about income. It imports, as used here, something entirely distinct from principal or capital, either as a subject of taxation or a measure of the tax, conveying rather the idea of gain or increase arising from corporate activities. Income tax comes from corporate activities. If you're not in corporate activities, do you owe the income tax? No, you don't. Who owns the corporation? Well, Hale versus Hinkle laid it out in spades for us. A corporation is a creature of the state. The state is sovereign over the corporation. The corporation is incorporated for the benefit of the public. A corporation is a state franchise. Incorporation is a state privilege. A corporation is subject to the laws of the state. Its powers are limited by law. It must obey the laws of its creation. And a corporation has no constitutionally protected rights. There's actually been judges that say, don't bring up the Constitution ever again in this court proceeding. Because it doesn't apply. We've contracted out of it. And now he's judging on a certain law. And he's just getting fed up with you bringing up something that doesn't even apply to your court case. Because we're incorporated. We're going to be judged, and the law we're going by is the law of the corporate charter. Do you see how that works? But we get all mad as Christians about how the judge is ruling. And he's making the right decision, and we beat him up verbally saying, you're terrible, you're horrible. The problem's with us. We chose to do this. The judge didn't make us do it. No one made us do it. This was completely voluntary. God does not allow governments to tax property. I don't know if you knew that, but there's no property tax in America. We call it a property tax, but it's not a property tax. It's a tax on something that arises from property. That's how they get around it. They create something else, and then they tax it. And we volunteer for that something else. If we don't volunteer for it, we don't owe it. Now, I haven't discovered how you get away from property tax, to be honest. I think there's a way of escape for that. There's a way out of it, but I haven't found it. I'm pretty sure there is one.
But we're looking.
Well, God promised a way of escape for everything.
Yeah.
He did. He said in 1 Corinthians, there's a way of escape, and we can seek them out. But I haven't found that one. So far, since 1963, I think it is, they got rid of this. There was a law that said you can go out and plant your flag. This is my land. Build a fence, and it was yours. In 1963, the government claimed all the land, and no longer can we do that. Now, I think there's a way of escape, but I don't know what it is. They get around this by enticing the people to use their money system. That's why we owe the income tax. The income tax is a tax on the use of commercial paper, which is incorporated. We agree to this system when we sign up for Social Security. Do you see our problem? We signed up for it. That to secure these rights, governments, this is from the Declaration of Independence, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Where does the government get their power to rule over us?
We consent.
We consented. We consented to the income tax when we signed up for Social Security. And we'll go to court and fight it. You'll see people go to jail. One of my favorite science teachers of all time went to jail for almost 10 years because he didn't understand this. Social Security. Look what our courts even say. They call it the government's insurance scheme. I love that because it's true. Our courts are just honest. They're brutally honest sometimes. And they tell, when a judge writes out his opinion, now understand, they're men using God's system, but it's about as good as it's going to get with man running it. And our judicial system is where all of our rights are intact. The government's insurance scheme now before us rests not on the idea of the contributors to the fund earning something, but simply provides that they may justly call upon the government in their later years for protection from the rigors of the poorhouse, as well as from the haunting fear that such a lot awaits them when journey's end is near. It's an insurance scheme, is the way that this judge put it, but it's an insurance plan and we sign up for it. In fact, that's what the Messiah said. They asked him, or is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar? He said, render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And we think, what a clever way of getting out of a sticky situation. No, it's the same thing today. If he said, is it lawful to give unto the Federal Reserve System? He would say, render therefore unto the Federal Reserve the things that are the Federal Reserve's, and unto God the things that are God's. Our money system is the Federal Reserve note. They made it, we signed up for it, we owe the tax.
Corporation.
It's a corporation. This is our problem. You should Google what our founding fathers said about corporations. In fact, I'm going to have it in next week's lesson, a whole bunch on corporations. It's the lesson I was worried about offending a lot of people. So,
So you don't want to miss that one.
yes. I don't know if you noticed on the chart I put up there, you know the first 5 commandments? If you read all the statutes, they're almost entirely government. That shocked me when I got done with it. This is all government. All the statutes on the first 5 commandments are government. To me, that's shocking. We're going to talk about the implications of that next week. The Constitution. Congress cannot, by any definition it may adopt, conclude the matter, since it cannot, by legislation, alter the Constitution. We're always complaining, that judge is going against the Constitution. No, he's not. We're just not understanding what's going on. We're not understanding the law he's ruling under. We're just not understanding. This judge said, it is hardly lack of due process for the government to regulate that which it subsidizes. Well, that makes sense. If the government is subsidizing our money, can't it regulate it? Of course it can. First fruits is another way that we pay. I know I really went on a tangent with tithing, but tithing is compared to the income tax. And the income tax is a huge deal in America today.
Well, what I like on it is, see, most people don't realize there's 3 tithes.
Yeah,
Most people know 1 tithe.
yeah.
And so, in that, taking it in context of what they are and where they are, the practicality of them makes a lot of sense.
Yes, they do.
So
And
you're saying we're already doing the first tithe just by
I consider it
by
that
our
way.
income tax.
I consider our income tax as my first tithe.
Okay.
Now, I don't by any means think you shouldn't give to whatever church we go to.
Right.
They're giving us part of the service, it's just not the whole service. But I would consider that more of a free will offering, which is why I think nowhere in the New Testament does it say to give a tithe to the church.
Right.
Well, it's something different going on. It's a lot like what we're doing today. But that's the frustrating thing to me is you want to teach all 3 tithes at the same time, but they're all for a different purpose in a totally different context. They just don't fit in the same presentations. We're not talking about the feasts right now, so it doesn't make sense to talk about the second tithe. First fruits, there's 5 statutes. All the first fruits of your crops shall be offered unto the Lord. The first fruits of your crops shall not be burnt on the altar. They're not burnt because they're given to the priests. It's their food, it's their payment. The first fruits are for heave and wave offerings. The heave and wave offerings were the payment for the priests. We went over that last week. You shall not eat of your crops until the first fruits have been offered. That's putting the priests where they are rightfully deserved. First, since they don't get to make a living with this, the first of all their crops goes to them before they can eat. It makes sense when you think about it. You shall give the first shearing of sheep to the priest. I didn't know where to put this statute in. It's hard to relate this to first fruits, but it's really not a peace offering. It's not a firstborn offering. I don't know where to put it. So it's the first of something, so I put it under first fruits. If anyone's got an idea where else it would go, I would be open for it.
It's like a
But
crop.
yes, it's like a crop from your sheep. But this is also an endorsement of property tax being the tithe. This is property that comes from industry, which is, what you make from raw materials. God's into raw materials, not fake materials. Our government's into fake materials. The firstborn. There's 8 statutes. Firstborn are to be set apart for God. There's an important point to make here. God changed this statute. Now the Levites are to be accepted as the firstborn. So originally he said, I'm taking the firstborn of everybody, your firstborn male, and they're going to serve in the priesthood. But then the idolatry happened. And he said, no, now I'm going to take the Levites instead of all the firstborn. Probably because they stood with Moses after the golden calf idolatry. They were given that privilege as a result of them standing firm to that. That's just my suspicion, but the scripture doesn't say one way or the other that I know of. Firstborn males of man are to be redeemed. So now that the firstborn aren't given to the priesthood, when we have a firstborn, we give a lamb as payment for that to the priesthood that we were supposed to give our firstborn to. Unclean animals, their firstborn are to be redeemed with a lamb. So when you have an unclean animal, you pay the priesthood with a lamb. Obviously, you don't give the unclean animal because you can't eat an unclean animal. The unclean animal's neck shall be broken if you don't redeem it. So if they find out, someone's going to break that animal's neck and now you're out the animal. The redemption price is 5 shekels. The firstborn clean animals are not to be redeemed. In other words, you have to actually offer them. And that's the next statute. Firstborn clean animals are to be offered. And finally, you must make the redemption within 1 month. So it's got to be done immediately. So you have a firstborn animal, a male, you got to redeem it within that month. The head tax, this is one we don't hear about much. That was an annual payment of a fixed flat weight of half a shekel, which is about a half ounce of silver. Okay, they did a half shekel annually. This was always measured by the tabernacle or temple weight, so it's paid based on how the judicial system sets up our currency. Every male age 20 and older has to pay. So I think 20 is that age of accountability, or that age you become an adult. It's used to repair and service the tabernacle or temple. So if there's damages to the tabernacle or temple, this tax is used to pay for it. The head tax, the law does not say annual. Nowhere in the Torah does it say annual. But in practice, this is what they did. In 2 Chronicles, they took the census or the poll tax, the head tax, to repair the house year to year. In Nehemiah's day, they still did it year to year. But they only charged a third. So it wasn't the same amount. Maybe the fluctuation of money, who knows. But I believe maybe, when the scripture is silent on something, we have freedom. And that's kind of what the spirit of the law is today. Who knows how much it's going to cost to maintain our tabernacles or our temples or our court system. And that's something that our priesthood would have to determine. But there's some, I just wanted to share that with you because there's some...
You can call it a maintenance tax.
Yeah, it's a maintenance tax. That's probably a better way to put it. They call it a head tax because it's counting the heads. It's a poll tax. But the whole point is to maintain the tabernacle and the temple. Okay, so funding the Levites. The first tithe was 10% of all property. That's my opinion, but I think it's property, not just the animals and the crops. The first fruits was the first harvest of crops. That's done to pay for the Levites. The firstborn was the firstborn male of all your animals. That's to pay, including humans, to pay for the Levites. And then the head tax was to pay for tabernacle and temple repairs.